The
illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine.
You know, when I have a large project at home, sometimes it makes sense to do it by myself. At other times, I actually save money in the long term and have a much better solution if I use an expert. It's really not that much different with church planting. Church planters who focus on building their core team and actually planting the church and partner with portability experts like Portable Church Industries hit the ground running. Yes, you may have to raise more funds up front, but let me tell you something. If I could go back in a time machine and do one thing different in all the churches that I planted, I would go back and have invested that money in Portable Church and all of the super cool kit that they give you to make the volunteers and their lives much, much easier. Trust me, your volunteers will feel invested in, and they're going to give you more of what they got. And that time where people are setting up is going to be a time where it sets the atmosphere for you to thrive. If you're thinking about launching in the next 6 to 36 months, we encourage you to check them out at portablechurch.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the Church Planter Podcast. You are in for a special treat because Peyton Jones is not here. And that's always a special treat when he misses out. I'm just kidding. I am your co-host, Pete Mitchell, but Peyton is not with us today. Today, we have got Matt Fretwell. Matt, welcome to the Church Planter Podcast.
Man, thanks a lot, Pete. And I'm sure everyone just was like, click. And but it's awesome to be with you, bro.
No. Well, who knows, right? Usually when it is because of me that most people leave, but just the way it goes sometimes. Hey, we've got a great topic for you guys today. We're going to be diving deep on discipleship. Before we go there, though, Matt, one of the things that we always like to do on this podcast, and I think you've done it before on Hardcore, so we always like to tell your story. So to kind of get us up and running, tell everyone how you came to faith and then how you got involved in church planting.
Yeah, so I sort of have the oxymoron growing up as an Episcopalian, and I was saved. It's an oxymoron because I was first saved, so to speak, at an Episcopal revival. Like, those two words just don't go together. But that was back in the 70s, so I'm dating myself. I'm in my late 40s almost now. And I accepted Jesus at 11, but I really didn't surrender to Christ until about 31. I had a lot of dark years that I went through, drinking, carrying on, fighting. I was a street brawler, doing all the things I could possibly do wrong. I tried to do them. And through it all, even in the culinary arts field, which God allowed me to be really successful in, I always was close to God, but I never fully surrendered to his will. And, about the age of 31, it looked like things were pretty good in my life. I would say if you looked at that, you would say, hey, this guy's a success. He's got a business that is raking in some good money. He's been on the Food Network. He's, accomplished quite a bit, family, everything else. But on the inside, I was just breaking apart. I was miserable. I was drinking myself at night to sleep, and then just waking up and doing it all over again, working, crazy 18, 20-hour days. Well, not 20, but maybe 18, 19-hour days as a business owner and executive chef. And I got to the point where I almost didn't even want to be there anymore. And as I started to lose the love for that, I was burning out. And I got to an aspect of where I was literally throwing up, dry heaving in my driveway, and went to the hospital. They did their blood work and said, hey, you have a liver like a 70-year-old. You keep this up, you have 5 years to go. And then he came back and said, quite honestly, your enzymes are so high that I think that you probably have hepatitis B, and I want to do more tests. And I about felt crushed because I thought, man, if that's what I have, then I'm done. Like, I can't touch food. I can't be around that stuff. And I just threw everything away. So that's when I went home, got on my knees and said, you know what, Lord, I've sinned against you. I've ruined my life. And if you want, you can have all this. Just take it away, and I surrender to you. And if you take it from me, I'll serve you for the rest of my life. And it was like, you hear about these things, and it really was. It was a miraculous aspect that happened to me where I just felt the warmth of God come upon me, and I knew that He had delivered me from alcohol, and it was immediate. I mean, it was like just a rapid thing that came upon me, and I remember standing to my feet, and the first things out of my mouth, I remember saying, "Devil, you lied to me my entire life, and I want my life back." And I said, and I remember the scripture, and I just said, in the scriptures it says that, the thief must pay sevenfold, and you must pay back sevenfold for what you've stolen in my life. You've ripped my life apart from God, and I know that He is my master. And so at that point, I was like, what am I going to do? I knew I was called to the ministry when I was 8, but I just ran from it. I really ran from it as far as I could go. And there are reasons for it, and I don't need to get into all that. Matter of fact, I talk about it in one of my books that I wrote. But then that took me into the place of, hey, where do I go from here? So I knew that I lost the love for cooking, lost the love to own my restaurant. And if you're an owner of a business and you lose the love for it, you just need to sell and get out, because it's just not good for you. And that was kind of what I looked at. And I started to discover where my gifting was, what I should do. And I remember I was in the Methodist church, and there was one Methodist pastor, and he sat in my living room, and I never forget, he looked across from me and he said, "Don't BS me, man. You're apostolic." And that was the first time I'd ever heard that term even used. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he started really talking to me about that and working with me. And so I got into the candidacy in the Methodist church, and I went through 1 year of candidacy to be licensed. And things didn't work out there. As a matter of fact, I got right to the end there. I was about to go see the bishop, as so be it, to go to licensure, and realized that really I didn't align very well with all of the doctrines that were there. Doesn't mean that any of them are wrong. It means that I think you need to sell out your whole heart, mind, and soul to what you are going to teach and what you believe. And so I said, you know what, I don't really sell out to all these, so maybe I ought to look at it. And so I ended up going the Baptist route because I'm more Baptistic in my principles. I wouldn't really say that I'm like sold out Southern Baptist. Matter of fact, like the first time I heard Gaither music, I was like, that is bad. I was like, wow.
Dude, I grew up listening to that, and I know what you're talking about. I feel your pain.
So my wife and I still like cringe when we hear like Southern gospel music, and I know I'm going to get a beating for this, but we're still like, wow. Anyway, like we went through this journey where, I felt like God was calling me into church planting, and I said, honey, I really think this is it. But we were having these Thursday night meetings at my house, and like they were just Bible studies. A guy came with a guitar when it first started, and we just started really trying to do it organically, just a Bible study. And then before we knew it, we had like 20 people in the house, and we were eating food. And I'm like, you know what? I think this is where God wants us to do it. So I went in kicking and screaming, and I was like, Lord, I don't want to do this at all. By that time, I had started seminary, and I wanted an income. And of course, church planting doesn't provide an income. And it's a lot like being an entrepreneur. It just, it's a lot of risk taking. And I got into it, and like I said, I probably got into it. Now that I look back, it's funny. I did everything wrong, man. If there was like something today, like if I talked to myself now and I went back like, let's see, almost 10, 15 years, I would be like, you're doing this incorrectly and wrong, and don't do that, don't do that. So I did all the don't do's, and now I laugh about it. But that's really how I got involved in it. I guess through first being involved in an 829 plant where I was, and then from there, I really felt God calling me after so I left the Methodist church, went to an 829 plant. From there, went to an SBC church as an associate discipleship and evangelism pastor, and then I got into church planting. So it was a journey. Yeah.
Is there like an unwritten rule at New Breed to be associated with New Breed? You have to look like Peyton? Because I never noticed how much you look like Peyton until right now. Shaved head, white in the goatee. I'm like, dude, I'm looking right at him.
Peyton and I always laugh about that too. We're like, you got to have a shaved head. So we always laugh about the aspect that God gave some people hair, and then some people he just gave like really cool shaped heads. So whatever.
Well, he definitely gave me the hair because my head is misshaped. Like, I'm not kidding. I got divots, and it's literally squared on one side. I don't know why it's squared on a side, but it's jacked up. So
yeah, you got all dents and dings. It's probably not good to shave your head.
Not for me. It would not be. Not at all. So if I go bald, man, it's too bad for my wife. She got to deal with it. I
told my wife there's only two options. It's bald or Bosley. That's it.
Nice. Nice. Well, here's the question that after everyone just heard your story, I'm sure it's the first question that comes to their mind because it's the first question that came to my mind. Who cooks the meals at your house?
Yeah, right. So I and my wife would admit to this. I never married my wife for her cooking. It doesn't mean she's a bad cook. I just didn't, I'm like, hey, when it comes to cooking the meal or Thanksgiving meal, all the big thing, that's me, and I'm all over. I'm like, just leave the kitchen alone, put the knife down. Like that's my deal. And
I could imagine. Well, I mean, you're a professional chain chef. I mean, of course, it's your deal. So
yeah, I love it. There are still aspects of cooking, like when all my kids are together and it's Thanksgiving, like that is my meal where I'm like, let's throw down. And I cook way too much. I'm like, oh, like this year I think we did like for an appetizer. I had like a pastry coated brie that had a fig and cranberry chutney on top, and it was baked, and so that was just like an appetizer.
I literally just had ramen for lunch, and now I'm listening to this. Like, it's not even fair. Wow, man, that's great. That's great. Well, hey, look, for everyone who's listening, today's topic is going to be a really important one. It's on the topic of discipleship. And we've got Matt to talk about this because it's been something that you've studied a lot, for your schooling and for everything else. And it's such a topic that is so important in the church today. I kind of want to kick it off with just, I want to get your initial first thoughts on the importance of discipleship and what you see, kind of just as the broad strokes. What are we doing wrong in the American church or the world church? I don't know how you've broken it down. And what are we doing right? And then let's go from there.
Well, what are we doing wrong is pretty easy. So there are vocations out in the world where all of us learn some type of vocation. You would never, let me take it into cooking. I would never have taken a chef in and then just put him on the line, so to speak, or made him cook and just said, go at it. I literally would take him by the hand and say, these are the recipes that I have, and I'm going to work with you before we even open for dinner. I'm going to walk him through what the recipes are. I'm going to walk him through how to put all that together, and then I'm going to make sure that when we open up that he works with me. I'm not just going to throw him in there. I want to make sure that he understands what the vision and mission is of the business, that he understands that each plate that goes out has to look a certain way. It has to have certain aspects of it to put it all together. But this is the same whether someone's a welder or whether someone is a telemarketer or whether you don't throw people into a position and just say, have at it. But we do this in the church, and we think that everyone understands when we just say, be a disciple. And Jesus didn't do that. I mean, he walked with them, he talked with them, he ate with them, he sat with them, he cried with them, and he laughed with them, and he sang with them. And yet we think that if you just come into a building on a Sunday for an hour, that people are going to sit and then they're going to assimilate this stuff and get it, and then all of a sudden understand what a disciple means. But yet we would never do that in any of our businesses. We would never hire somebody and then say, hey, I want you, to go excavate. And have you ever ridden a bobcat before? No. Okay, well, you just got to pull the levers and, start it up and do that. I mean, we would never do anything like that. But yet for some reason within the church, we think that that's the correct way. And I understand that we can go back through history and we can find out why. And I don't fault, I always say this, I don't fault the current church. I understand that the errors that we're in were there because they developed over time. And each generation sort of morphed through disciple making in their own way. And it's just come to be what it is what it is. And it's a messed up, mixed up ideal that disciple making has become didactic, or I should say, has just become a Bible study. And you never saw Jesus say, all right, guys, whip out the scroll of Isaiah and we're going to go and exegete each word and we're going to learn what it meant. He just didn't do that. He showed each person what it was. And when he caught them arguing over something, he would, break into it and say, hey, what were you guys arguing about when you were on the road? Let's talk about that, and he brought the life lessons down to their level so that each one of them, I think, even like Philip, like, what do you mean we can't be with you? Until Jesus walks them through it and they're like, he's like, now I get what you meant by it. But he never just left them hanging. And I think a lot of times we leave people hanging, Pete. That's where I think we're broken.
So you mentioned some of the history, and you said before the call, you're like, that's kind of the boring stuff, but you have intrigued me. So give me the synopsis of what's the history and how did we mess it up over time? Yeah,
it can, and like I said, there's a reason why it all developed in the way it developed. So once we branch into about the 2nd century, things were different as the church started to gather from the 1st century to the 2nd century. Obviously, we were under persecution, and the church is gathering, and they're observing fellowship. They're observing Christ's teachings throughout daily life, in deep conversation, in deep aspects of everyday transformational life. They celebrate the Lord's Supper together as feasts. They commune with one another and with Christ. Their identity is in baptism. And as that starts to morph from the 2nd century, they start to say, you know what, when the new converts come in, they call them catechumen. And which is where we got our word for catechesis, which is the teaching. And so they would bring someone through for about a year into catechesis, and this person would be a candidate for baptism, and they would lead them through this year of candidacy, so to speak, until Easter Sunday. And they did this from like the 2nd and 3rd century. And we know this just from documents that are written, and they talk about all this. And they did it for good reason. I mean, you had a lot of people that were infiltrating the church and coming in, and they wanted to make sure that they understood that their identity was in Christ. Now, it's not that baptism, there wasn't regenerational baptism like we say now. It's not that someone is saved by it, but they wanted them to understand that the mission and vision and identity of to be with Christ and the church and the mission of the church, that's what the identity in baptism was. So while the candidate was being walked through all that, they were literally in communion with the body of Christ deeply and intentionally every day. It was a communal thing. And that's also while they were doing their work. So they were working in community, they were at home, they were eating, and all this stuff took place in this togetherness, this withness, as my professor, Dr. Robinson, and Doc Reed wrote a book, With, and I love it. And it talks about this withness that we have. So then you had by the 3rd century into the 4th, and I hope I'm not boring people and they're already sleeping, but what happened was heresies popped up, right? And so people were like, oh, Jesus wasn't really like fully God and, or fully man. And then you had this Gnosticism, which by that time had already flourished into something totally different. And all these heresies pop up. We don't need to get through all of them. You look in your theology books and you'll see it. while they did that, they started to say, okay, we need to teach more about doctrine. And the doctrine needs to be really important that the people get it. Because if they don't get the resurrection, if they don't get the gospel, if they don't get these things, then they're going to be off course. So there was a shift from the communal intentionality about daily living to more about teaching about doctrine. And then by the time, like this continues on that shift, excuse me, all the way until you get to like the Reformation, where things really start to be guided by this teaching of doctrine and its importance. Even though community was important, it wasn't as much because by the time the Emperor Constantine, I'm not going to blame it all on Constantine, but by the time the state married the church, things were different. You know, the church wasn't persecuted, we weren't running around. So we didn't have as much of the hiding. And, you know, when someone got saved, the whole household knew it. Like you and I, we live in a home where you can run and hide. I got a man cave, you know, and I can sit in there by myself. When someone got saved in the early church, there was like 20, 30 people living in that house. So the whole house got saved because the whole house heard about it. So things are way different now for us. But I kind of went down a rabbit hole there. But within the Reformation, you had then what was called paedobaptism. And I'm not going to blame it on the infant Baptists either when they baptized infants. I understand why they did it and how all the things occurred. But once that started within the Reformation and you started baptizing, think about this. From the beginning, if someone wanted to be baptized, they went through a year of living in community with people and understanding the importance of baptismal identity and mission of the church, the identity with Christ and with the church. What's the difference in all of a sudden now someone's baptized as an infant and they're told you're already in the church? So now it's just about learning doctrine, right? It's not really about this missional identity in which you're baptized into. You've already started a leg up. When it was only at the point where they were baptizing converts, now they were baptizing you, telling you that you're in the covenant of Christ and that salvation's still a part of the aspect that you need to respond to it later on in life. But basically, you're in the covenant because you've been baptized into it. It's a totally different realm. And so that's how it shifted. And discipleship has just changed from an intentional communal immersion of understanding the identity and mission of the church in Christ to more of didactic or more teaching, if you will, than training. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So tell me this. Let's say we got a church planner. I don't know if they're, pre-church plant or got the core team up and running, or maybe they're still in that beginning phases of their launch. How would you coach someone like that to be a disciple maker and to really disciple people in that type of scenario, in that brand new to the church plant world?
That's a great question, because this is exactly what I did my doctoral work in. And it's the aspect of making reproducible disciple makers, because I always say that Jesus didn't make disciples, he made disciple makers. And so if we want to train church planners to effectively reach the community, and what I mean by effectively is reaching the lostness. So within New Breed, we have and I'm kind of the head guy in the aspect of I'm going to get the initial phone call to sort of weed out if someone's New Breed material or not, whether they can fill out an application. And so I always ask the question, what's the reason why you want to join New Breed? I'm not going to throw away the answer here, but for me, it's the gospel in lostness. So if in disciple making, the church planner isn't effectively trying to reach new converts and the lostness within that community, well, then we're missing the point. We're just trying to build an empire, so to speak. Now, I understand that there are many methods and there are many models, and I'm not going to really jam on any of them because thank God that everybody has sort of a different vision and maybe they're going about it in another pronged approach, and I applaud that. But for your question, this is what we do at New Breed. We have a lot of guys that are sort of parachuted into a community. And so what we want to do is train them to make disciples in the community. How do they do that? First, they have to learn how to map the community. That's exactly what Paul did in Athens. He walked it. and he went through it, and he wanted to be able to see what's their love. So we say this. We say, what's the Mars Hill? And what that means is, what do they worship? What's their idol? And we can do that in today's society. So we have a planter right now, one of our guys who's, matter of fact, our regional coordinator, David Thompson, up in Oregon. And when we talked through this, he said, what he found was the idol that was there was craft beer. So how's he going to reach a community in that if their idol, what they worship, is craft beer? Well, throw the biggest, the best, and the most darndest awesome barbecue that you can, which is what he did, and let them BYOB. Now, we're not going to condone people getting, I'll say wasted. I'll use a good term. So, and be able to do that. But if it's going to bring the community together to understand that look, we're something different here of a set of community, but we want to introduce ourselves to who we are. So we map out the community, and what that looks like is, okay, I have a church plant that we supported here in the Richmond area, and I walked the guy through and said, look, there's a tattoo shop down the street right there. Right next door to him is a barber shop. Those are two different subcultures. Learn how to reach that subculture. You can go into the tattoo place. You want to introduce who you are. You want to write down the name of who they are, and you want to get to know them. One of my acquaintances, good kind of acquaintance, almost friend sort of slash guy, Tim Brister, is phenomenal at mapping communities. He's awesome at this. And this is the aspect where you're writing this stuff down almost like you're a creeper. Like you'd be like, okay, how many kids you have? How's your family? What are you doing? And when you write all that down, the next time you go to that tattoo shop, you open up your little pad of paper. You're like, oh yeah, last time I went in there, I talked to Bob. Bob had 3 kids, and one of his kids had a broken leg, and I prayed with him. And so the next time you walk in, you go, hey, you review your note, you walk in, you go, hey, Bob, how's it going, man? Good to see you again. How's your kid? Man, I've been praying about his leg. I mean, you're not doing anything deceitful, but you're building a relationship in a subculture that is not being reached. And you're doing that in a way by telling them, first of all, how much you care and how much you want to build a relationship with them. And so planters are in the community by doing those two things: one, mapping, and another, finding the Mars Hill. And then I would say third, it's a third-pronged approach, is by maximizing and minimizing, and Peyton has talked about this many times. You want to maximize your income by maximizing your exposure. And what that means is find a tent maker position, right? Find what I call an anchor trade, something that the community needs. So our David Thompson, once again, to speak about him, he's a chimney sweep. Man, he's in every single lost person's home within Bend, Oregon, cleaning out the chimney. He's building a relationship with them. Paul was a tent maker. He was literally in the marketplace making tents for who? Nomadic people. They traveled from place to place. And he's like, hey, I got something for you. When you're traveling, you're going to live in this tent. Let me tell you about the gospel. And when you're living in this tent and you're going from place to place, think about God's dwelling place, that he is with you. And this tent is an expression of God's gospel and how God has incarnated himself to dwell and live within you. You know what I mean? He's explaining that to these guys. So disciple making is really being about intentional within the community and building relationships and doing it smartly.
I tell you, that's really interesting, because in business, the best salespeople in the world do what you just talked about, and that is they will find all about your family. What are your loves? Oh, you like golf? Great, and they'll keep a CRM with all of that minutia in it. And it's without a doubt in every industry, the top salespeople are always those people. And then every time they meet up with someone, just like you said, they'll review that person's contact record and go, oh, that's right. They got little Susie's in 3rd grade now. And he really likes golf, and he saw the UFC fight last time. Oh, we just had a big one. I'll have to ask him about, and that's what they do. So to me, it's always funny when I see this stuff from business creep back up in ministry, and I can go, hey, I see a total correlation there, because that's exactly what we do in business.
I bet this is exactly what Jesus said. He said, be as wise as serpents. He also said, even make friends with the money of the world. He didn't say to love it, but he said to make friends with it. And he said, you can be like, it's like the parable, and my father used to hate it, the parable about the manager who whittled away the guy's money. And then he was wise enough to go back to the people. Basically, he was embezzling funds, but he goes back to the people and say, how much do you owe my master? Forget about 100, write down, 50 barrels, And so you're like, well, what is he doing? Man, he's being smart. He's like, I'm about to get kicked on the can. I'm going to be hanging out in the community. So I'm going to go ahead and be receptive to understanding that he's like a serpent. He's mapping things through and he's seeing that. It doesn't mean we're being deceptive with people or dishonest or disingenuous. It means we're being wise. We really want to take an interest in their life. So of course, business principles, and I'm like you, Pete, I used to be a business owner. So if I would go out to a table and I'd have a meal in front of them and I would say, how do you like it? And they said, this sucked. I'm not going to be like, boy, well, I think it's a winner. I'm like, really? What didn't you like about it? Which, by the way, I never really had that. But if they did, I would really think about but I would ask them, how do you think I can make that better?
Right.
What do you think, and I want to get that feedback and I want to build relationships. I mean, I had a guy who would come in and he was on the White House staff, and the only thing on his card it just had the presidential symbol and his name, and he's like, yeah, I work with the White House. And I ended up just building a great relationship with this guy, and over time, General Richard Myers came in to eat, and you could just watch the Secret Service guys all over the restaurant when you see him. And it was like, I guess from this guy I just gained this clearance and trust, and more government officials started coming in to eat. I just realized that to build that relationship, he was talking about my food and the aspect that I was giving him confidentiality, that I respected who he was and I didn't flaunt it. And that's just part about building relationships in business. We want to get to know people. Same thing within disciple making. Why do we think we're just going to sell? And that's my problem. I love I'm evangelistic by heart, and it's probably because I'm an extrovert. But we've sold evangelism as if we just need to give someone to get a sale, and once we get the sale, we're all done. And we've neglected what is discipleship. Discipleship in the aspect of evangelism is really, that's the first part. Like the evangelism, the easy part. The hard part begins when a person, surrenders their life to Christ. Then we're like, all right, man, now I need to walk with you through this. So I don't think a lot of us are committed to the fact that if I lead this person to Christ, and of course, Holy Spirit's power, and the person comes and they surrender their life to Christ, I don't think we're really fully committed to Christ and prepared to say, all right, now I'm going to walk with you through it.
Right.
We just want to say, another notch in my belt. That's cool.
I see. I get that because, one of the stories that the people who listen to the podcast and listen to it for a while have heard about, my assistant, who I always thought he was an atheist. I mean, we've been friends for years. He actually sold me the house I live in now. He did the loan on it. He did the loan on the first house I ever owned. Good friend. We'd worked together. Through a turn of events, got into a position where I honestly feel he got railroaded, and now he's serving time in federal jail. And he pled guilty because it was either face 20 years or go to jail for 2. I mean, you're 56 years old, you got an 11-year-old and a 21-year-old. You kind of go, well, 2 years is better than 20, and you just go for it. Well, unfortunately, obviously, when you do that, no one wants to hire a felon. You're not going to get a job. You're a felon. And so I needed some work done. I said, hey, look, man, why don't you come work for me? And we always had a good relationship, and he always knew I was a Christian. We talked about it before. But our conversations, the way that they always went, I just assumed he was an atheist. So, now he's working for me. And obviously, I got all the marketing stuff, but I also run the Bible Inner Circle, Church Planner Magazine, Church Planner Podcast. That's a big part of my world. And so he has to hear all this stuff. In fact, I still remember calling up Peyton and I go, hey, Peyton, man, we got to get the stuff done for Bible Inner Circle. We got these 5 interviews that we did. We need to have the interviews transcribed and cleaned up because obviously the way we speak is not the way we read. And I'm like, dude, I got a buddy I want to hire to do this, but he's not a Christian. So 1, I need your permission. And 2, after he cleans it up, I need you to go back and review it, make sure he didn't change anything that, wasn't supposed to be changed. And not that he would have done it intentionally, but accidentally, because there were a lot of times he was looking up words going, man, I never heard this word before. What does this thing mean? Right. And so we thought it was funny that the first things he had to do was read some of the best interviews ever with Alan Hirsch and Brian Sanders and all these guys. Right. And through the months and literally hours upon hours of us talking about God and going through, all of the questions that he'd had, all of the opinions and objections he'd have. One day, we're sitting here in my office and all of a sudden he goes, I made some comment. I said something about, the sinner's prayer, right? Just, the sinner's prayer. And he goes, well, what's the sinner's prayer? I go, oh, that's just something we call it, when someone, says, God, forgive me, blah, blah, blah. And we're talking and he goes, I did that when I was a kid. I was like, oh man, that's awesome. And he goes, and I did that again a couple of weeks ago. And I remember going, I was starting to choke up, right? I'm fighting it back, right? And he was just now willing to tell me that he had, made that, awesome. that choice, that commitment. And I remember thinking, cause this is, the beginning of September of 2017, and September 28th, he had to report to Sheridan Federal Correction Institute in Oregon. And I remember going, well, crap, dude. How do I make sure that, I didn't use the word disciple, but I'm like, how do I make sure he still gets what he needs? Because, dude, he's a baby Christian who's had, 56 years of objections to all of this. How do I do that? And so the thought that you were just describing, that some people are like, hey, you know what? I got him saved. Great. Let's go on to the next one. I totally agree. It can't end right there. There's got to be more, because it's okay, now we got this whole thing. Now we communicate via email mostly because it literally costs them so much money to call. By the way, guys, get involved with prison ministry. The way we have set this stuff up in America, there is almost no hope for these guys. You literally have to pay for your own toothbrush and toothpaste in prison. You have no money. There's no money. So, how do you do this? So every dime that he's gotten gets goes so we can talk to his family, not so we can talk to me. But even emailing me costs time because he's got to pay for the computer usage. So, but that's the only way that we can really communicate now. And so now we communicate via that and books. And I send him the Bible Inner Circle newsletter because, hey, he worked on it for the first few months. He was the guy who had to put the whole thing together for us and me and Peyton. And, but that's that's the thought running through my head is, man, okay, I got to disciple this guy, but that wasn't the word. I think Peyton was the one that kind of brought that up to me. He's like, yeah, now you got to disciple him. I'm like, oh crap. Now I got to disciple someone? That kind of scares me because that's not my deal, right? You're the pastor, Peyton. I'm just the dude in the background, right? But
yeah, I didn't sign up for that.
Right. Yeah, I know. Oh crap. Now what do I do? And, so no, I'm just bringing that whole story up to just emphasize, man, I totally see what you're talking about and the importance of that. So let's say we got someone who did just get saved and they're not going off to jail, which does happen a lot with a lot of our church plants. But let's say it's not that situation. How does discipleship look, or what form can it take with that new convert?
Well, it's going to be going through the daily aspects of life. So one of the first guys that I had brought through discipleship and been discipling with for years. I mean, it was just his life was torn apart, living with a woman and not married to her and having kids and blah, 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 and people would ask me like, but they're, they're not living their life, the way they should be. I was like, so when does a disciple have to be a perfect Christian? When do you think that you're the Holy Spirit? Like God is leading them through a journey and you're to take them on it. Right. And so I'm not going to condemn them and say immediately like, all right, you need to get this out of your life, 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 this out of your life. And all of a sudden the new believer thinks, man, this is just a list of do's and don'ts. Instead of being like, hey man, I understand, when you're discipling someone, you're talking to them about their hurts, their emotions, their feelings, probably their strongholds, definitely, and the things of that, and you're going to walk them through and say, how's that really working for you? Do you think that that's bringing you closer to God or further away if you make that decision? And how can you make a better decision with that? How can you start to cultivate a relationship with Christ in your work, in your home? So here's the thing. Discipleship is triangular. It's not vertical only, and it's not horizontal only. It's triangular in the aspect of we have a relationship with us, our Christ life, between us and Christ, that union. And then we have this other aspect where it goes out on another direction between us collectively with the church, and we're discipled corporately within one another. And then also we have the aspect where it connects to all of those things, where everybody is reaching and teaching one another and walking with them in daily life. The problem is we don't have what I like to say a Christ life. We have a work life, a home life, and a church life. And none of these are assimilated together. And so for the person you're going to walk with through that, you really just want to be with that person. And I would say men with men and women with women. That's probably the best way to do it. And with the guy I'm going to walk with, I'm going to say, hey, I don't want to see you in my office, and I don't want to see you for a Bible study, but I am going to ask you when we meet, what are you reading? What are you praying about? Do you hear God in your life? Do you hear him speaking to you in prayer? If not, why not? And how do I cultivate a better prayer life with you? If so, do you want to hear how I pray and walk you through that? Have you ever considered fasting? And fasting is not to manipulate God. Fasting is to put the flesh in under submission to the Spirit. And so the Spirit is in control, and you're teaching your body that the Spirit is in control here, not the flesh. So when it tells you it's hungry, believe me, I get hangry. And so I'm one of those people. But these are parts of what you're walking through somebody, what the early church did. They just brought people through intentional life where Christ is enmeshed into every aspect of their life. And so I ask questions, and I think disciple making is more about asking questions than it is about telling people what they have to do.
Wow, man, that's really powerful. I like that. I really like that. So you would say then that a lot of the discipleship, it's going to be done almost, I can't use the term that just went through my head because I don't respect it enough. We're doing life together, man. We're doing
right.
But it is kind of a lot more like that, where, like you said, it's not, I don't want you in my office, because then it's kind of a weird dynamic then, right? Someone comes in, sits across your desk or whatever, and
yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, immediately there's a desk that's separating you from them. You're basically saying that you're the expert and they aren't. What you really want someone to know is that you're not the expert, but you are a type of, and I hate, once again, cliches, mentor, but you are someone who's you're an imperfect perfection in Christ. As Christ is, and the Holy Spirit is sanctifying you, leading you through this sanctified life. None of us has everything pegged. None of us has everything perfect. We all have our own foibles. We all have our own imperfections. We all have our own strongholds. We all have our own sin, and we all struggle at a different level and in some other place. But yet we've been through potholes. It's like telling your kid, You know, when you tell your kid, like, you don't want to go down that road. I've already been down that road. And they look at you like, poor old man, I have to go through this. Just like I did with my dad. Like, Dad, you don't understand. You don't know. I'm 16. I understand everything. You know, and a new believer, they kind of look at you like, well, all I know is all I have to do is, you know, Jesus loves me. This I know because the Bible tells me so, right? And you're like, you know, there's going to be a lot more to this. Like, what about when your boss, you know, tells you something and you want to flip them off? Like, how do you deal with that in a Christ-like way? Does it mean that you have to be, you know, a foot mat that someone's going to brush off on you? You know, do you have to be walked on? So these are all situations in real life that we want to go through and walk someone through as they have questions. You want them to bring questions to the table as you bring questions to the table, and you want to meet with them as much as you can. And realistically, it's probably going to be 1 to 2 times a week. 2 is a lot in our lifestyle, the way we're so just driven by scale. I mean, like I disciple more than one person, so that's a lot. I mean, just meeting with one person takes a lot out of you, and it has to be intentional on both sides. We need to say that. Excuse me. Yeah. So if we're not intentional about, if the disciple is not intentional about growing, you know, you can't force someone. It's like, you know, if you have someone at your work that just wants to go through the motions and all they want to do is clock in and clock out, they get what they put into it, and they're not, they're never going to grow. For me as a chef, when I started to come up, man, I didn't care if you called me a brown nose, or I didn't care what you called me, but I wanted to have my nose up the chef's butt because I wanted to know what he knew. There was a reason why he was the executive chef, and there was a reason why I was only, you know, a pantry chef or just a guy making sandwiches. And I knew I didn't want to be making sandwiches for the rest of my life. I wanted to be the head guy, and I wanted to know what he knew. So when the first executive chef, when I kept trying to learn from him, and he was like, hey, if you're serious, here's a book, and I'm going to give you this to read, and then come back and tell me what you think. And then let's start to apply this, and I'm going to teach you things. And I remember as a dishwasher, we had a crew of dishwashers in this place that I worked in. And there was one guy, man, that, you know, like he always got passed over, even though he was hired so much longer than I was. And the chef would come over and say, hey, Matt, come over here. I want you to do this and this. And the other guys are scrubbing the tiles and the dirt and the stuff underneath, and they're getting ticked off because the chef is having me prep food and they're all cleaning. I'm like, man, I don't want to be a dish dog forever. You know, forget that. You know, and so discipleship is kind of the aspect of like, man, forget that. Like, I realize that life is hard. Life has suffering. Life has pain. You know, I want to walk with someone through this. I want someone to encourage me. I mean, even today, you know, like I texted Peyton, I was like, I'm struggling today, bro. Like, I'm having a rough day here, you know, and I just need to talk to you about some stuff, you know, and I just know I have that with Peyton. And he's like, sure, man. And by the time the conversation was, and it was just texting, and thank God for modern technology, you know, but after it was over, I'm like, man, thanks, man. You lifted my spirits. I'm encouraged today. Thank you, bro. I love you, man. And, you know, like, that's what it's about, to have that outlet. And if we think that, you know, being a Christian is a Lone Ranger, we missed it.
Well, I could really see that, especially where you live. You showed me it was 21 degrees, but it felt like 12.
And it does too, man. It's been really like bitter cold. And I grew up in New York, like where it was cold, but I've lived in the South too long. So, and I have no hair on my head, so that ain't no joke. When I was young, I had a mullet, right? So I had the business, right? Business in front, party in the back,
That's
baby.
it. That would have been a great picture. That's what we should have stuck on the cover of Church Planter magazine.
Oh man, I try to hide that picture.
Oh no, we got to find it. Someone's got to put it online somewhere. We'll do a Google search.
It's you could go into it's in my Facebook feed. Man.
Oh, is
there's
it?
some, yeah. There's some of me, man, with the mullet.
Nice. I love it. Well, look, Matt, I think that you've shared just a tremendous amount of information here. That I'm in that position right now where I'm like, okay, I want to like really think about this and let it marinate in and kind of go, okay, how can I take this and utilize what I've given? But I want to make sure that I give you the opportunity to, if there's anything else that you feel is really important that you haven't shared yet, a question that I should have asked but didn't ask, give you this time right now to take advantage of that and share that.
I would probably just say that there's not really a wrong way in the aspect of building a relationship with somebody. And if you say it like, well, in the church that I'm in, they're not doing this. Should I leave if they're not doing that? And I would say, no, what you should try to do is build that culture of disciple making. And if we would grasp that evangelism is important in reaching new converts, but if a church is not effectively and intentionally trying to reach out to new converts and build new relationships within the community, then we're missing the point. And I would say be that person in your church that wants to try to change and build that culture, that new missional DNA. Because I have guys that will say, like, man, my church is kind of dead, and I have no one discipling me in my church. Where do I find somebody? Because I don't have so much a mentor. I don't have someone. What do I do if I don't have someone like that in my life? How do I find it? And where do I go about it? That's probably the only question that I hear the most. And I said, everybody should be discipling and everyone should be discipling somebody. So you just have to do that litmus test and then understand this. Whoever you ask to disciple you, you must be prepared that you're going to be accountable, that they're going to ask you some tough questions. Like for me, like sometimes I'll ask a guy like, did you look at porn this week, man? Just flat out, just tell me, like I'm not going to condemn you. I want to walk with you through it if you're having a tough time. I want there to be that clarity. How did you speak to your wife? And I have guys that I'll be brutally honest with, and I'll say, I said this and this and this, and I think we have to have that. We have to. So don't ask someone. That's my point. Don't ask someone to disciple you and then not be prepared to be sold out to any question. Any question's got to be on the table. Matter of fact, I think that when Peyton just interviewed I had Dr. Chuck Lawless. I had him as one of my professors. Awesome. Love the guy. He's just phenomenal. And I think he talked about the same thing on hardcore church planning about making sure that you're accountable and you understand that. That if you ask someone, don't just say, hey man, are you going to disciple me? Disciple doesn't mean open up a Bible study. And anytime I go to a church website and I look on the front tags and it says discipleship ministry, I'm like, just want to do face palm and be like, dude, discipleship isn't a ministry. It's a way of life. Like, it's not like if someone in your church is not involved in that ministry that they're not a disciple. It's not something to be conquered. Discipleship is to be journeyed. It's not a conquering. It's not a certificate that you get. Like, oh, I went through the discipleship course and now I'm a disciple. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's a journey. So, I guess that's probably all I would do. And then if I could throw the plug in there, because our discipleship podcast, The Wretched and the Wrecked, we've had Peyton on too. So The Wretched and the Wrecked, we just do, that is all about discipleship, the whole thing. And we've had guys like, Alan Hirsch and Doc Reed and Chuck Lawless. We've had all those guys, and Peyton, Alan Briggs, same guys you guys have on basically, but we just don't ask people like who they're going to beat up.
So it's not as good. I understand. Well, hey, I appreciate your time. Real quickly, because we've never actually brought this up on the podcast, and we can't for certain reasons, but since Peyton's not here, I can bring it up all I want, because today it's my podcast. Mm-hmm. Tell us, what's New Breed, what's your involvement with it, and if they want to find out more, how do they reach out to you?
Man, New Breed, number one, I am biased. I love them. I think they're awesome. We are a training network, and within our training network, we do 3 different assessments. And through our assessments, we want to know, are they trainable? Are they learning? And are they sendable? And within that, we have a 4-fold process of training guys. So we have a Voxer app that's 24/7 where we keep them connected to one another. We also have a Zoom call, which everyone's connected to if they want to be every month. We have a Pathright, which is sort of our content development and missional engagement that they can take. And then we also connect each person to a regional coordinator. So every applicant that comes in, they go through that fourfold prong. So as a training network, we just focus on not a timetable, but we want to help them gain the aspect of understanding, maybe make a better launch, better core team, reaching the community better, and know how to do that in the best ways possible. So we're not a funding network, so we're not going to throw money at you, but we are a training network that is committed to helping one another out. And our strong position, I would say our strength, is that we're not one or two experts. Everybody is considered sort of the expert. It's a brother and sisterhood kind of the aspect where everybody that's in it pours into one another. One of our distinctives is we don't just train men, we'll train women right along with it. So we believe Priscilla and Aquila were together, and so most church planning networks maybe they'll do an assessment and they'll say, hey, can your wife come in for sort of like an interview? And they'll interview her to make sure she feels like the guy is called, but then they're not going to train her. It's sort of we just find it kind of ridiculous, and so we want to train the woman as well. So I'm the director of operations. My whole job is to make sure that all the leadership is being developed, the leadership structure. The guys that are in leadership are getting the training and the help and the resources and the assistance that they need. And then also that the planters, as they come in for the application process, they're being assessed, and that they're also being connected with the right regional coordinator, and that they're being connected to the Voxer, Zoom call, all those sort of things. And I would say this, New Breed has taken off in the last year. We had a stellar 2017, and we have church planners right now in queue waiting to join. Like we have several that are just waiting. We just took on a few more that just started at the beginning of this year, and we're just seeing leaps and bounds, even globally. Took on another church planner in Spain, right near Catalan, which is it's the third most unreached people group in the world, and that's New Breed. We go to lostness, and we love that. We are just, it's spiritual warfare, flat out, and believe me, some of our guys have some serious spiritual warfare hitting them hardcore, but we're dedicated to one another, and we're dedicated to just, loving each guy and who we're with, man.
And how do they find out more about that if that's something they want to look into?
So newbreednetwork.org, or they could email me at matt@newbreednetwork.org. Man, that by the way, that's like Peyton's ding, man. He's away, and he's like, hey, did Pete catch up with you? So right. I love that guy, and I know those dings always come up, and so
that's awesome.
So it's pretty cool.
That's
right?
awesome.
And awesome. So you guys that are listening, Peyton is really like with us, like in technology. But pretty funny. Anyway, so they can reach me by matt@newbreednetwork.org or newbreednetwork.org, and they can hit just the button for info. And I'm gonna get all that information anyway. Twitter, MT Fretwell, or Facebook, you can look me up. I'm very reachable, and just want to be a part of everybody's life to see them grow in spiritual formation and discipleship.
Well, Matt, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you taking the time to share all this with us. And just in closing, I want to remind everyone, if you are looking for a place for your church plant, you're thinking to yourself, hey, where can we do church at? Where can we get into our community? You might want to consider Regal Theaters, their cinemas. I mean, people are already going to the movies. I tend to go to the movies every Sunday. And they've got a whole division headed by church planners that help you utilize their facilities Sunday mornings when they're not using them. And it's really easy to get people to go to the movies if they're going to church. And you can find all about that at corporateboxoffice.com/theater-church. And it's spelled THEATRE-church. So thanks so much, Matt. Again, appreciate you being on. And just want to remind everyone, If you want to reach the ones that nobody's reaching, you got to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing. Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplantermagazine.com.